Your YouTube channel is doing fantastically, nearly 40,000 subscribers. So congratulations on the growing success of that. How's it going?
Thank you. Yeah, it's just steady growth. I just kind of keep pumping out content and hope people watch it.
How did it grow? Did it sort of, you say steady, so was it like by the end of the first or second year, was it already getting very popular, or did it take longer than that?
No, it took longer. It's a marathon, not a sprint. That's definitely how YouTube growth goes. It's just I mean, I've been doing this since 2014 now, I guess, in terms of putting content out. So, now I'm at a point where I have two channels, and one of them is just clips, and the other one is the main channel where the content comes from. And, I get peaks, I get spikes, I get help, like when I show up on, international big shows and stuff like that. Like when I was on Leah's show, that definitely helped. But otherwise, I just kind of keep pumping out the content and sharing it and hope people share and like the stuff and keep growing my channel.
People listening today will have heard John Atack talk a little bit, and he talked very sort of cerebrally and a lot about the history and stuff like that. And I guess I'd like to know a little bit more about the experience of actually being in Scientology. How did you what's your personal story? How did you get involved in Scientology? Was it your family, or how was it?
Yeah, I was actually raised in Scientology. So I was not a first, there's a big difference between what we call first generation members and second generation members, such as myself, people who were raised in it. And second generation or multi-generational they're still working out the language of how they want to talk about this in the fields of psychology and sociology. But generally, we talk about it as second generation members, and that's me. And that means that I was never asked to be part of Scientology. I just was in it. And so, my parents got involved when I was about 3-4 years old. And I don't have any memories of anything of life before Scientology. So grew up with it, went to public school. My parents were semi-hardcore, you could say. They worked for Scientology actually in the 70s. Oh. This is back in the day, right? I mean, I'm 51, so this is a while ago. And so I grew up with it in the 70s and 80s. Out of high school is when I really started getting into it. My father suggested I start taking some classes, and I started doing classwork while I was still in high school. And so 2 years in, I graduate high school, and then the church really started working me over because they wanted me to work there. And my parents had worked for the church in the 70s, and they'd had their own experiences with that, which were kind of negative. They didn't have a great experience working for the church, but they were still believers and still practicing Scientologists at that time. So they encouraged me to do classwork and stuff, and I did. And I went all in. I thought it was great. I thought it was wonderful, and I believed all the indoctrination. And I really didn't have any, I'm 15, 16, 17 years old. No real world experience, no critical thinking, no alternative views ever expressed to me, because my parents were, and all my family and friends were all, of course, fully behind this. So I joined staff. I started working for the church right out of high school, and I did that for 8 years.
Was your school, was it like, this guy's Jewish, this guy's Christian, and I'm a Scientologist?
No, I should be clear. I'm talking about family friends now. My friends in public school were not Scientologists. I meant the family, all the people that my parents associated with, the people who would come over for parties, the people whose houses we would go over to, they were all Scientologists.
Okay. And at school, what did people think when you said to them, I'm a Scientologist, my family are Scientologists? Was that normal?
No, not at all. But nobody was also, at this point, I was in a small town. I was in Santa Maria, California. So it was kind of a farming community. We'd moved up there from Los Angeles for my high school. And so the people around me had the manners and good sense to not insult me to my face, but nobody really understood. This is 1985. This is pre-internet. Nobody really knew anything about Scientology. So I wasn't getting a lot of crap about it. I wasn't really getting much of anything about it, except some snide remarks every now and again about Dianetics.
Okay. I mean, as far as I can tell from what I know about Scientology, it's not that far away from, I mean, it's very different, the stories, but it's not as any more outrageous than many other religions, is it? In terms of what you're supposed to believe?
I guess it depends on your definition of outrageous. If you believe that, imbibing and eating the body of Christ is a literal act, through the whole Catholic transfiguration or transformation, whatever that word is. Transubstantiation, that's the word.
Oh, yeah.
If you think that's a thing, then you might not think Xenu is that outrageous, right? But Scientology's belief set is not the thing that's alarming about it. It's what they do that makes them a destructive cult, as we use the term, and that's a different thing from, say, what the Catholics or the Christians or the Jews or the Islamists are doing in a broad sense, right?
So you're a teenager, you're working for Scientology, and so what are you doing exactly? What does working for them mean?
Oh, well, I ran classwork. I ran classes. I was trained as a courseroom supervisor. And that's kind of equivalent. You might think about it as a teaching position or a teacher role. In that I was overseeing, people doing classwork, but Scientology classes are not a teacher with a bunch of students and the teacher lectures to them. The way classes are done is it's an individual study where every person is doing their own classwork, and the supervisor is there to sort of oversee, answer questions, direct them to resources, and make sure that they get the material and that they understand it and are successful graduates of the classes so that they can actually use what they've studied. So you could be supervising a class of 10 people and all 10 of them could be doing different classes, different courses. But the methodology that Scientology uses to supervise them is the same, and that's what I was trained in. And I did that for a number of years until I sort of got promoted to being the sort of administrator or executive over all of the services or delivery that we were providing. Scientology is a business. It operates on a business model where it sells materials and services to people. It's not about worship and coming in and kumbaya. It's about coming in and paying for classes and counseling or auditing. So if you're not paying, you're not doing Scientology.
So were you paying?
No, I was a staff member. And as a staff member, initially I was, when I was first doing services as a public person, when I was in high school, I was paying for classes. But then as a staff member, you sign up and you basically are volunteering at the church to work for them, but you get your classwork and your auditing for free.
Okay. And what is auditing?
Well, auditing is the process of therapy that Scientology offers, which is sort of one-on-one for the most part. Almost all brands of it are. There's various flavors or shades of this, but auditing is an attempt to basically reach back into your past and relieve or unburden a person of the accumulated stresses and traumas and bad things that have happened to them, which L. Ron Hubbard insists are the reasons why people act in a bad or irrational or, weird way now, is because of crap that's happened to them in the past. And this past goes back millions and millions and millions of years because Scientology believes in past lives and the concept that you are an immortal spiritual being known as a thetan. That's the term for it. They don't use soul or spirit or ghost. They use the word thetan. And as a thetan, you have had lots and lots and lots and lots of adventures and misadventures through time and space. Pre-Earth, you've been around for millions and millions and millions of years. And your experience here now in this life that you're having on Earth is just one of billions of lives that you have led. And you cannot remember them. That is by design. And it is through the course of the auditing that you are made to remember these past lives and relieve the stress and trauma of those past experiences. And before I go along any further with this, I should definitely go out of my way to remember to say This is all a scam. There is nothing true about Scientology, and L. Ron Hubbard did not find the key to unlocking our, spiritual travails. This is all a con, and it is a money-making scam. So everything I describe about Scientology here, I'm really talking about the window dressing of it. And I want to be clear about that because people can get confused and, kind of interested in what I'm talking about if they start taking it seriously. And they shouldn't. Scientology is not something to be taken seriously.
Again, yeah, it does sound, no less ridiculous than a lot of the religions that millions of people believe in across the world. It's just a little less. It's not something they've heard as often, so maybe that's why it sounds so ridiculous. People might even be laughing, thinking, "Oh, what these sort of alien spirits going into souls and all that stuff." But if you look at most religions, a lot of them have that kind of thing. It's just we've heard those stories since we were kids. So what does 2.5 decades in the church, what does it look like? Are you staying you're just in a flat with a normal job, an apartment with a normal job, or are you like, I'm imagining you're on a boat all the time, or you're in that big church place with that looks like a Hollywood place. It's bluey white walls. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Yes, that's where I lived. I should also say, since we didn't get into this, that in addition to the staff time that I spent 8 years working for the church as a staff member, when I was 25 years old, I joined the Sea organization, and I did another 17 years of that. So you're right, it was 2.5 decades of working for the church, but I wanted to fill that little gap in there because the Sea Org is kind of like going to the Vatican and working there. It's like full time. You're flat out. You're just dedicated to working for the church, right? That's all you're doing. But it's not like going to the Vatican in terms of getting to dress up in mitres and robes and weird outfits and stuff. What you do at the Sea Org is it's a paramilitary outfit. So you have ranks and ratings and uniforms, and it's sort of acting, we all acted like we were in the military, yes sir, no sir, how high sir, that kind of thing.
Even in like downtime, like you're with a friend, just you're in this building and you're just like, oh hey, there's no like, oh hey mate, how's it going? Or would it always be just like, hello? I'm thinking of like Jehovah's Witnesses. I think they all call each other brother something and father something,
No, it's not like that.
Okay, so you were a bit more casual just with a friend in the organization.
Well, yeah, yes, it is. But let's be clear. The Sea organization is a 24/7 outfit. So, there's moments of casualness and time off and chill days and when you're not on post, then you are like, yeah, sure, hey mate, right? But that's after 11 o'clock at night. I mean, the Sea Org is 8 in the morning until 11, 12, 1, 2, 3 in the morning kind of operation. And it's 7 days a week. So there's no days off. There's no pay. There's no vacations. There's no seeing your family whenever you want. There's no going down to the pub and getting a brew. None of that happens in the Sea Org. The Sea Org is a contained bubble world existence where you live on a Sea Org base. And those blue buildings you referred to is an example of that. The blue building with the big Scientology sign across the top of it, that's where I lived. Wow. For 17 years, I lived in that building.
Can you go out?
Well, we would go out. I would cross the street to go to work. Or I would go, I'd walk up the street to go to one of the other organizational buildings and do some work over there. My whole life was within a 1-block radius for basically most of that time. And 3 of those years, I didn't even see the light of day very often because I spent it almost exclusively in a basement.
Jesus.
So it's a very sheltered, secluded bubble world life. And I want to get that across first because it's important that the context of that be understood. So within that world, at 11 o'clock at night on a Tuesday, you get off work, and if you're not too exhausted to say hi, you go down the hall and say, hey, mate, right? And you go have a conversation with a friend. But most of the time, you're so damn tired, you just want to go to bed, And maybe this night, you'll be able to get 6 hours of sleep as opposed to the 3 hours of sleep you were getting for the last 3 nights. You see what I mean? So it's a very intense,
oh my God,
dedicated, fanatical kind of existence. I mean, the Sea Org are really the fanatics of Scientology, and that was me. I mean, I'm not trying to raise myself on a pedestal or anything with this. I was all in. I was completely brainwashed by this stuff, and I thought, like everybody else in the Sea Org, that I needed to martyr myself this way, that I needed to be doing this level of intense, crazy work, because that was the only way we were going to save the world. And that's what we thought we were doing. We actually really believed we're saving the world. And that's really the environment of the Sea Org.
Were you very high up?
I was middle management. So I didn't get into, say, David Miscavige's inner circle, the leader of Scientology. I didn't get that high up. But I did get to a position where I was managing all of the church services and delivery that were going on across the Western United States. So anything west of the Mississippi, I was overseeing the delivery of Dianetics and Scientology services in every one of the organizations west of the Mississippi. And I did that for about 8 or 9 years.
This must have had a horrible effect on your mental health. I mean, do you feel it even now?
Not now, but I've been doing active recovery work since 2014, right? So for the last 7-8 years, I've been working very hard on recovering from the experience of Scientology. And as a second generation member, that presents all kinds of challenges, because I don't have a pre-cult life to look back on and go, oh, well, I was okay here, and then I got in Scientology and I went whack for a while, and now I'm going to get back to normal. There never was a normal for me, right? So that presents all kinds of fun barriers and problems. But I can say with some degree of surety at this point that I have done a great deal of work to overcome the belief set and the way of thinking and a lot of the fanatical stuff that goes on there. I have worked through that and kind of processed that stuff. But like I said, it takes work to do that. It's not something that just happens over time. You gotta really dedicate yourself to it.
Yeah, I'm so sorry that you had to go through all of that. It must be very difficult and confusing. And I imagine that if you're having a bad day, even if you can't know if that's because of what happened in Scientology or just you would be having a bad day anyway, because people have bad days. It must be very, very confusing.
It has been. There have been. It's been very, very interesting to process all of this. I've compared it to, and many people have used this analogy of stripping away onion layers. There's layers to this, and it's built up in layers, and so it makes sense that it would deconstruct in layers too. You get the surface level off stuff first, oh yeah, the L. Ron Hubbard is a liar. Okay, good. Yeah, okay, L. Ron Hubbard's a liar. Like, you figure that's out right away. But, it took years for me to get to a point where I would stop oversharing with everybody, Because when you're in a cult environment like Scientology, and especially when you're at a level like the Sea Org, where everybody is just so fanatical about it, it's a very snitchy confession culture. So everybody's telling on everybody else all the time, right? You have these authoritarian sort of overtones to it. And it takes years. It took years for me to get out of that habit, that way of I would meet people, and within 5 minutes I was telling them very personal, deep things about myself, because I didn't know how to relate to people otherwise. And it took acclimation and like, oh yeah, kind of re-socialization, and like, oh yeah, people don't talk to each other like this, do they? And they don't yell at each other within 2 minutes of meeting each other either, do they? Maybe I should try to rethink that, Like, it's a very intense environment. And so I had to pull back on a lot of that intensity and learn to chill out and realize that the world is not going over a cliff tomorrow, and it's okay. And I can actually enjoy some of life without being, feeling so anxious all the time about how I'm not doing enough or I'm not doing my part. And that kind of guilt induction and shame and and blame and all of that, that's just part and parcel of a cult experience, and that's what I was habituated to. So recovery from that was not just getting rid of Scientology beliefs. I think that's the point I'm trying to make here, is it's not just about rejecting Hubbard, it's about unlearning so many bad habits and just weird ways of going about living life, and that's been the journey for me.
It's interesting what you say about that intense way of being, because I think from the majority of people like me who don't know very much about Scientology, the first image that comes to mind is probably Tom Cruise. Before L. Ron Hubbard or David Miscavige, who's and then John Travolta. And they are both very intense people. They're probably the two most intense celebrities I can even think of. Do you think that's related to their experience in Scientology?
Absolutely, it is. Yes, very definitely. Especially Cruise. Travolta's actually a pretty nice guy. I mean, in person, I've met him. I've interacted with him. He's a nice guy. He's very super sincere, and he's very dedicated. I really don't have a lot of bad things to say about John Travolta, except for the fact that, of course, he is so deluded, like I was. He's all in on this belief system, and it's a very destructive belief set. It contributed to the death of his own son. I mean, it's pretty sad.
What happened there with his son?
His son was born with a disease of some kind. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head right now. But Scientology is not real big on doctors, and they don't eschew medicine. They will go get medical help, and they do believe in, medicine and vaccines and stuff like that. At least some of them do. But Hubbard was always about solving it with Scientology. And so he insisted that his auditing techniques could be used in order to cure physical ailments. Now, he backtracked on that when he got in legal trouble for it, but he still kept making faith-based claims as a church. This is one of the reasons Scientology became a church, by the way, was so they could get away with making faith-based medical claims. And Hubbard wanted that. He wanted to make those claims. And so Scientologists are made to believe that Scientology auditing can create physical change in the medical arena, and that you can cure psychosomatic illnesses. And Hubbard makes the outrageous claim that 70 to 75% of all illnesses are psychosomatic in origin, meaning you are making it up in your head. And that is a grossly irresponsible and outrageous claim, but Scientologists believe it. So they tend to not go for the doctor visit or go get medical help. They'll go down to their church first. And in the case of John Travolta's son, his name was Jett, and named after an L. Ron Hubbard character in a book, by the way. Oh, wow. He died because he did not get the sufficient amount of care, at least as far as we can tell. I mean, it might have been that he was going to die anyway, but it was tragic and it was horrible. But it's very hard to separate Scientology from that scenario when you know how Scientology feels about medicine and how much help this kid needed. So I'm not in any way trying to imply that John Travolta is complicit. I'm trying to say that he's misguided, and that as a result of that, it's very possible that his son died as a result of that. So that's pretty bad, right? But as far as Cruise goes, Cruise is actually, if you can believe it, much more fanatical than Travolta. And he's also extremely, extremely narcissistic. So it's really all about him. And the sort of example that I use to sort of demonstrate where Tom Cruise's head is at is, and I don't think John Travolta would do this, but Tom Cruise did. And what he did was his niece kissed a boy in his house without Tom Cruise's permission, right? She was being a teenage girl and she kissed this boy, and it was this moment of incautiousness because Cruise said, don't do that, and she did. And as a result of that, the consequence was she was kicked out of the family.
Wow.
For 2 years. she had to go live with family friends, not family, friends of the family, because nobody in the family would let her stay with them.
Are they all in Scientology?
Yeah, they were all Scientologists. And she got kicked out of the family to go live with these Scientologists who were friends of the family for 2 years while she made up the damage that she had done to Tom Cruise.
Wow.
Over those 2 years, after which she had to beg in writing to him with a very long essay breaking down all of the penitent, sort of work she had done to make up the damage for having violated the rules and gone so out ethics and been so immoral. And how dare she break the rules like that? And basically, like I said, had to beg Tom Cruise to be allowed back into the family so she could go back to seeing her own parents. That's Tom Cruise.
They say never meet your heroes, don't they? I mean, it's funny. I was watching A Few Good Men the other day, which was probably one of his breakout movies. And what's strange about that is all those movies from that time, he's sort of playing himself. And I know it was a different time, so things were different. But he's a bit of a dick. He's horrible. Watching that, it's not dated well. The movie's fantastic. It's one of the best movies ever. It's a classic. He's horrible the whole way through. Sexist, chauvinistic, selfish. And he is like that in most films. And even if you allow for the different generation and time and everything, he was still extremely selfish, and that was supposed to be like a good thing.
I'll go one further for you and tell you and your viewers the most reflective role that Tom Cruise played of himself.
Magnolia.
Yes.
Sorry.
That's
just wanted to show off. I interrupted you when you were saying I wanted to show off so much that I knew it.
No, you're good. You nailed it. That's exactly right. That is Tom Cruise. And I think that Paul Thomas Anderson saw something there. Now, I could be wrong. PTA could just be, just another director, but his work on The Master tells me that he is a very insightful guy. Paul Thomas Anderson I'm talking about. And he's the one who wrote and directed The Master, which is pure Scientology from beginning to end. And he can make as many disclaimers as he wants. But that movie is 100% Scientology. And he nailed it. Wow. He nailed it. And I think he nailed it after watching Tom Cruise and then going and doing some research.
John Atack said he was actually consulted on that movie, The Master.
Oh, that's interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah. He also said, when I said, what's going through Tom Cruise's head? And John said, not very much.
That's right. That's exactly right. He doesn't think a lot. He's one of these, he's one of these powerhouses who has this like bottomless well of energy. And when he is focused or directed on a mission or a task, he's the Energizer Bunny. He just goes. And he's also best friends with David Miscavige, the head of Scientology. David Miscavige was Tom Cruise's best man when he was married to Katie Holmes. So they are bosom buddies. And if you know anything about David Miscavige, and it's not hard to find out, he's a sociopath and he beats people and he enjoys it.
Yeah.
And Tom Cruise is on that wavelength. It's not like he doesn't know what David Miscavige gets up to. He thinks it's justified. He thinks David Miscavige is right for having to abuse and beat on people because that's what they need in order to get their heads out of their asses so that they do what they're supposed to do and get their jobs done. This is the attitude that Scientology, top Scientology management has about its members. And Tom Cruise is 100% behind that kind of abusive treatment because he thinks that that's what's necessary to get the job done.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, and which makes me wonder about his own. Well, I don't want to say he's a psychopath. Well, I'll just say it. Maybe he is.
I won't diagnose Tom Cruise, but I will say that he is not a good person.
Yeah, okay. I think that's fair enough. And then if he wants to debate that, he can come on the show. He probably won't.
Exactly. It's just people have no idea. The guy has such good looks and such a winning smile that everybody just falls to pieces over him. He's a monster. And we really need to be clear about that. Tom Cruise is a monster.
It's an interesting thing, actually, because I know we talked a little bit earlier. I don't know if it will be included or not about sort of woke stuff and people talk. And a big facet of woke stuff is about privilege. And obviously, different people have different privileges based not only on race, but other things. But it is really interesting that he's so physically beautiful that, men, straight men, women, everyone, just can't help but look at that smile. And you just sort of, you get away with having a wonderful, he's obviously very talented and driven as well. But, yep. An ugly Tom Cruise, what would he be doing now?
Not a lot. Looks will get you way farther in this world than they should. And I really, really wish it was different. But, people are people, and they're going to do what they're going to do. So when you left, I just watched, just before talking to you, one of the most extraordinary videos I've ever seen, which looked a bit like a hostage film. I hope you don't mind me saying, but somebody claiming to be your ex-wife. Obviously, Scientology, when you leave, they put up videos about you, especially if you're quite a well-known person. John Atack has a similar one about him. And so could you describe that video? And is that actually your ex-wife? Yeah, that is actually my ex-wife. What happened was I left Scientology in at the end of 2012. I finished up working for the Sea organization, and I left that group, and I wanted to be a public Scientologist. I wanted to still do Scientology. I just didn't want to work for them anymore. So in 2013, I was out. I was able to get access to the internet, which I didn't have before as a Sea Org member because they policed that. Right. So I didn't have internet access up until then. Not really. I had a little bit. I was sort of exceptional in that I had a little bit of access, but I wasn't going out of my way to go try to find all the bad stuff about Scientology because I was still a Scientologist. And when you're a Scientologist, you police that. You self-police. Now, what happened was, though, after I got out of the Sea Org, I started reading about a little bit of this and a little bit of that. One thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. And before you know it, you're down the rabbit hole. And 3 months out of the Sea Org, I was out of Scientology. I saw, oh my God, I learned the truth. I learned that L. Ron Hubbard was a liar. I learned all this stuff. It was really bad, and I was very angry, and I was also still wrapped up with Scientologists, and they were my friends and my fiance and all these people. Yeah. And so I was very stuck. So 2013 was a really rough year for me because I was having to sort through this and figure out what I was going to do. And so I started speaking up, not anonymously at first on message boards and stuff. And then finally, by the end of the year, they'd figured out who I was, and it had all blown up, and I lost everything, and I was declared a suppressive person. So in 2014, I start making videos, and I'm out, and I'm loud and proud. I'm Chris Shelton. I'm a former Scientologist, and this was my experience, or here's some breakdown of what Scientology is all about. And I started, exposing the church's nonsense. It wasn't until I got on Leah's show, Scientology in the Aftermath, a couple years later, that the church started paying any attention to me at all. And in fact, it was the day after I was on her show that video dropped. And so they'd had it already, but they didn't unleash it until I was on Leah's show. I'd been speaking out for years, right? But it wasn't until I got on a national stage. So the day after that I was on Leah's show, that video drops, and this webpage drops about me being a deadbeat dad, and how I cheated on my wife and blah blah blah. Well, I did do those things. I did cheat on my wife. Right. And I talked all about it in my book, right? And I cheated on her with phone sex. I never had sex with anybody. I never even kissed anybody else. But phone sex, well, that's enough to get you in a lot of trouble with Scientology. And I get it. And, I was not faithful. And I own that. But let's talk about context.
Well, you can do whatever you want. Right? I mean, about 50% of relationships have infidelity in them. I've made that statistic up, but I hope that doesn't mean my girlfriend has if I haven't, if it's 50%.
Yeah, no, not at all. And I'm happily married now, and I'm very faithful. The point I'm trying to make is not that my cheating was a justified or good thing to do. But when compared to, the abuses that I experienced, assaulted, had a bone broken, spent 3 years in a prison camp. I mean, I more than paid for that infidelity, and continued to be a working hardcore, Sea Org member despite all of that abuse. I kept working for the church, but it wasn't until I got on Leah's show that they decided to trash me. And the deadbeat dad stuff is all just bullshit. It's all lies. It's nonsense. And so you go, well, there's a little bit of truth. There's a kernel of a bad thing I did, surrounded by exaggerated half-truths and nonsense, and we're going to dump it all on the internet, and here's the dead fish of, all this bad news about Chris Shelton. Well, the good news for me is that people could see through those lies very, very easily, because Scientology always overplays their hand, and all that did was help expand my channel.
Oh, good. I think, I mean, the funny thing about the allegations were they were all things where I just thought, like, even if they're true, who cares if you've cheated or someone cheated? A lot of people have cheated, and a relationship with a son or whatever, like, what do we know about that? But what I heard from, I mean, John was telling me that sometimes, I mean, some people have taken their lives from the stuff Scientology has spread about them. He talked about, I think, who was it? Somebody, maybe it was a priest or something, and they spread some rumors about he was molesting children and took his life. So it can be very dangerous as well.
Oh, Scientology is absolutely pitiless and ruthless about this, and it's called fair gaming. It's a practice they've engaged in since the late 1960s. This is old, ancient history for Scientology. It's been something they've been doing for a long time. I don't mean by ancient history that they have ever stopped doing it. I mean that it's been something they've been doing for forever. And they go after their critics very, very hard. L. Ron Hubbard wrote this into the DNA of Scientology through the various policies and issues and things that they have. Because Hubbard's dead. He died in 86, right? But all of his policies live on. And his vindictiveness lives on. And so you have this guy who prided himself. He would brag openly in lectures that he gave that if people attacked him, if even literarily as a writer, if somebody criticized one of his stories, he bragged about how he would ruin that person. He would just trash them, just merciless. He was not interested in anybody's criticism of anything he had to say or do. So Scientology doesn't have a self-corrective mechanism. It has to be the way L. Ron Hubbard says it is, and it's that way or the highway, and that's the end of the story. So if you have been wronged, if you have been in a situation where a Scientologist victimizes you, too bad. That's your fault. And that's how the church basically deals with you. So that's when you really start finding out what this thing's really all about, is after something bad happens and you go, well, I'm looking for some recourse or some redress or some justice or some help here. You guys took too much of my money. You didn't give me what you said you would. Or now I can't talk to my aunt because she's critical of Scientology. So now you're telling me I can't talk to her anymore? Yeah, you can't talk to her anymore. Well, I'm not sure I like that. Well, we don't really care what you think. I mean, that's kind of how you're dealt with, and this is what a cult is all about. This is why we call them a cult. It's not the beliefs, it's what they do with them.
That episode I did with John Atack came out yesterday at the time of this recording, of course. And I was sort of wondering, am I going to get anybody sort of having a go at me? And then if I do you as well, I've got 2 Scientologists in 3 weeks, it will have been. But John was saying like there's safety in numbers now.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't worry. The reason why is because here's what's happened is we're talking about an organization that's been around since 1953, the Church of Scientology as an entity, right? In that time, they have had a rise and they have had a fall. And they are on a steep decline now. This is not like just, some opinion on my part. They're really, really going down the tubes. And their apex, their peak was actually back in the 1970s. And they sort of tanked themselves back in the 1980s. Then Hubbard died and Miscavige took over, and it's just been a downhill slope ever since. They had a very, very tiny resurgence in 1993 when they got their tax exemption back in the United States. Otherwise, it's just been tank, tank, tank. And specifically, since the 2000s, since about the year 2004, 5, 6, I think it was 2007, Anonymous went after them. And there were huge worldwide protests against Scientology. And ever since then, that's really when they were exposed as not just a sort of weird, celebrity cult that Cruz was involved in, but actually something dangerous, something really toxic, something that was actually gonna hurt you if you got involved with it. And ever since then, Going Clear comes out, Leah comes out with Scientology in the Aftermath. People like me, Tony Ortega, John Atack, so many of us are speaking up. I'm just one of a chorus of voices. And all of us together have made really significant change. We really have. And so now you have a group that is pulled its flippers in, has sort of defanged. They can't publicly attack people because we just put it on the internet. Back in the 90s, back in the 80s, when they were really getting away with this stuff, the stuff you talk about where, that John mentions, where they're ruining people's lives, suicides, deaths. I mean, really nasty stuff is in Scientology's history. They got away with that stuff because nobody was around to expose them, and the internet didn't exist yet. And the internet has been Scientology's Vietnam. They've never been able to recover from the internet because L. Ron Hubbard died before the internet was around. He didn't even have a clue that the internet was going to be a thing. So he never wrote any policies and never had any bright ideas about how to deal with people on the internet. And so their whole tactic has been the tactic of a bully, where they're going to bully you into silence. They're going to insult you. They're going to sue you. They're going to go through your trash. They're going to follow you around. They're going to intimidate you. They got away with that for decades. But now we can just pull up our cameras and start filming them when they're doing it, right? And when they hire their stupid private investigators or attorneys or whatever, because they use cutouts and middlemen and stuff now for plausible deniability. But you know where it's coming from. It's not any big mystery who's attacking you when Scientology is coming after you. So now with that kind of exposure, they've retreated to the shadows, and they're still capable of doing nasty stuff. Don't get me wrong, but it's not like it used to be. And that's been because of all the public exposure and the support that we've received from people. So we need to continue that. I'm not saying we're done, not by any stretch, but we need to continue that. And that's why you are not going to be receiving any fair gaming coming your way. Because if you had done this show in the 1980s, they would go after you and they would destroy your professional and maybe personal life just because you had done this show.
Shit.
Yeah, but they don't do that now because they don't have the resources or the ability to hit every single person who comes after them, because there's too many of us now and there's too few of them. And frankly, with cases like Danny Masterson in the court system now, the church's liability, the legal exposure there is huge. So they are concerned about much bigger problems than, your podcast.
Yeah, there was that Louis Theroux documentary as well. I don't know did you see that?
Yeah, a Scientology movie, yes.
Yeah, they sort of followed him, came to his house a bit. Yeah, it wasn't his best film, was it? He didn't really get much access.
No, I did a review of it, which he saw, by the way, too. I tweeted it at him, and he commented on it. I was a little critical. I was glad he did it. I wasn't. I did recommend that people see the movie, but it does have some pretty big.
What did he say to your review?
I forgot. It was something on Twitter. It was sort of a thank you for your. I mean, it was not that dismissive. It wasn't a very detailed sort of thing. I just happened to know he saw it. So I was like, okay, good, he saw it.
I think he might have known it wasn't his best one. And when you're making a documentary, a lot of it is not about you, the documentary maker, but the people you're able to get access to. And unfortunately, they just couldn't there with Scientology. Right. They knew they'd be made fun of, I suppose.
Well, they had gotten wise a little bit, right? In that Louis thought he would play their game and he would get stalked and harassed, and they sort of flipped the script on him and refused to do that.
Yeah.
So then he had to sort of figure out what to do and scramble to come up with something else rather than do what he was originally going to do. And it kind of showed, and that was what I think where the quality suffered. But whatever, like I said, I did a whole video critique of that. And also, like I said, though, I do recommend people see the movie. I'd rather that they see it than they not see it.
Yeah, it was still very interesting, as was Going Clear. And, I'm just wondering about time. How are you for time? Are you okay next?
Oh, I'm fine.
Okay, then that is good. Tell me, but just what I had just thought about, and I only thought about it. And it's not really fair to say this, I suppose, but when you were talking about John Travolta and all of that, can people be... There's a lot of rumors around John Travolta and his sexuality. Can people be gay in Scientology, trans, whatever? Is it very conservative? What are the rules and things like that?
Okay, so yes, you can be gay in Scientology, but you're not going to get very far. There's Hubbard's policies and writings on this are reflective of the attitudes of, his growing up in the American Midwest in the early 1900s and the conservative values of America as a whole in 1950 and 51, when he wrote about how any kind of sexually deviant behavior, which is how they used to call any kind of LGBTQ activity, is demented, aberrated. In other words, you got a mental illness. There's something wrong with you if you are feeling that way. And certainly that applies to the entire spectrum of trans activity, right? If you are in any way feeling different than your, body's gender, then clearly you're the problem and you need auditing. And Hubbard says that this has to do with past lives and evil intentions that you have as a spirit toward, bodies and toward man or toward women, and that's the source of your sexual confusions and that kind of thing, or sexual, dysphoria. All of that comes from, past crap. And if you audit somebody, you can basically audit the gay away rather than pray the gay away. We will audit the gay away, right? Okay. And I watched people that this happened to. I watched a very flamboyantly gay hairdresser in Santa Barbara go through years of auditing, trying to fix his gayness, right? And what you find out when you get into Scientology is they'll accept you. Gay people, we don't have any problem with gay people. This is their frontline PR message now because they've had so much backlash on this. But the written materials of L. Ron Hubbard are fixed. They cannot be changed, and they're not going to just go delete them. So Hubbard wrote very, very clearly in 1950, 1952, 1953 that homosexuality is basically tantamount to a mental disease, and it needs to be dealt with. So eventually that's going to come out and be directed to you if you are LGBTQ and you try to become a Scientologist. So they might welcome you and take your money and do some classwork and do some beginning auditing work and get you up to a certain level. But there's going to come a point where you're not going to be able to progress anymore if you're homosexual or if you're LGBT. And not until you stop it, not until you knock it off. And that point is getting onto the place where that happens is at the point where they want to get you onto the confidential stuff, the OT levels. The super secret stuff.
Right. Okay.
Okay, they don't trust you. They can't trust you. L. Ron Hubbard tells them not to trust you because you're gay. You can't be trusted.
Hmm.
So you're a security risk, in other words, right? And so, I mean, Hubbard even implies that your gayness can be used as blackmail material, which back in 1950 was true,
Yeah.
but it's not true now. you know?
Well, if
So,
somebody's sort of married to a woman,
yeah, that kind of thing,
it's
right?
shitty. Yeah. I want to
Yeah.
ask you then as well, like a big thing for you is critical thinking. I was then
Yep.
thinking of ways that somebody could, how we could teach people to not be taken in by cults or I suppose any kind of extreme beliefs, political beliefs, and that kind of thing. John, again, I keep talking about John because I just spoke to him. If I'd spoken to you first, I'd be talking about you the whole time. But he's quite critical of critical thinking because he says, people think critically on both sides of like the political spectrum, for example, but their beliefs will take them one way or another. But where do you stand on that?
Oh, no, he's absolutely right. It's a rough go. Critical thinking is very akin to martial arts. I love this as an analogy. I think it works for a number of reasons. Opinions are a dime a dozen, right? Everybody's going to have tons and tons and tons of opinions. Critical thinking is a discipline of how to go about thinking in a logical, reasonable manner. The outcome of you thinking in a logical, reasonable manner is not set. Just because I've come to a certain set of conclusions thinking in a logical, reasonable manner doesn't mean you're going to come to the same set of conclusions thinking in a logical, reasonable manner. However, what you and I can both say with certainty is that if we arrive to our conclusions in a logical, reasonable manner, then we can justify those opinions. We can talk about those opinions. We can debate on those opinions with logic and reason and have a reasonable, rational conversation as a result. That's the advantage of critical thinking. It's you got somewhere by actually working through a logic train. You didn't just arrive there because of some, silly bias or opinion or faith-based idea that you have that's not grounded in reality. So critical thinking only gives you a better opportunity to have reality-based thinking. It doesn't guarantee anything. But similarly, to martial arts, right? If you're confronted with somebody who, wants to beat you up, well, the first thing to do is turn around and run. Any master of any martial arts is going to tell you that your Nikes are your best weapon, right? Every one of them tells you that, unless they're off the rails. So, but one for one, and I've been hearing this from martial arts masters since I was a kid. So, so I fall back to this. Well, same thing with critical thinking, right? You can use critical thinking as a weapon to try to own people on social media or in debates or something, but that's not really what it's for. And it's actually a bit of a corruption of its use to use logical fallacies to beat somebody with. Oh, that's just this, that's just that, you're just this, that's a false equivalency, that's ad hoc temporum. You start throwing Latin at people and stuff as though it's supposed to mean something, right? Critical thinking is about trying to make your way through the world in a sensible way. And that's what it gives you the potential to do. It doesn't guarantee anything, though. So I see where John's coming from, but I will push critical thinking every day of the week because it creates an opportunity for you to be able to think in a more disciplined way. And if there's one thing that we can say about cultists or about people who get into a fanatical or extremist headspace, is they don't get there by thinking in a disciplined, rational way. So that's why it's a proof against, or a potential proof against, extremism. It's not 100%, but you're going to get a lot fewer people going into an extremist headspace if they can remember to keep the discipline of critical thinking first and foremost in their minds. Very, very difficult. Very difficult to do. It's not something we're organically, know how to do. You have to be trained in it. Nobody's born a black belt. Nobody's born a good critical thinker. There are people who have potentials to be better critical thinkers than others, but it's a skill set you have to learn. And after you learn it, you then have to use it. And that's the discipline of it. And so that's my soapbox on that, because I'm a real firm, strident believer in this. But I also want to make people aware of the fact that it takes effort and work to do it. It's not something you can just toss off.
That sounds like a British slang for something that you didn't mean, but it's a good place to end as well.
I was doing double entendre there, actually, but there you go.
Does that mean the same thing in the US?
It can.